My father was a titan, Edward Sterling. He built an empire from a single hardware store. He could negotiate $1 million deal and quote Shakespeare in the same breath. But after my mother died, the titan began to shrink. Not his mind that remained sharp as a trap until the end, but his world's. The big house felt empty. The silence was loud. That's when we hired Clara. Clara was 35, 10 years younger than me. She came with impeccable references, a degree in geriatric care, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was efficient, quiet, and my father, to my surprise, seemed to brighten in her presence. She'd read the Wall Street Journal to him, debate politics, laugh at his old, dusty jokes. I was relieved and grateful. My brother Richard and I had our own families, our own demanding lives. Clara was the solution. We called her a godsend. The first change was subtle. She suggested we update his will. Just a formality. She'd said over tea in my father's sunroom, with your mother gone and the new tax codes. It's what a good fiduciary would advise. She sounded so reasonable. My father, sipping his Earl Grey, nodded. Clara's been looking into it. She has a head for numbers. I felt a tiny, cold finger trace my spine. She had been looking into it. The second change was the prenuptial agreement, or rather, its disappearance. Richard discovered it. He'd gone to the safe to get some old bonds and found the folder empty. When he asked Dad about it, our father, usually so precise, was vague. Oh, Clara and Mr. Evans handled all that, simplifying things. Mr. Evans was his new lawyer. We'd never met him. The old family firm had been too stale, according to Clara. The third change was the marriage license. It wasn't an announcement. It was a piece of paper Richard found in the fax machine tray, a copy of a filed certificate. Edward Sterling and Clara Marie Voss. The date was 3 weeks prior, a quiet courthouse ceremony. No family, no friends, just Clara, my father, and the mysterious Mr. Evans. We confronted him together. He sat in his leather armchair, a throne he'd seemed to shrink from lately, with Clara standing behind him, a hand resting possessively on his shoulder. "Boys," he said, his voice still firm, "don't look so grim. Clara has been my rock. This gives her security, legitimacy. It's a practical arrangement. Security," Richard spat, his face red. "She gets security from a salary, a bonus, not a marriage certificate." Clara's hand tightened on my father's shoulder. Her voice was a cool, practiced bump. "Richard, your father is a man of honor. He wanted to provide for me. After all I've done, this is his wish. You should respect it." That's when I saw it. Not in my father, but in her. A flicker in those flat, calculating eyes. Triumph. She wasn't standing behind him for support. She was standing behind a shield. We left, furious and powerless. We consulted lawyers. They were grim. He was of sound mind. A quick, independent assessment by a doctor Clara had suggested confirmed it. He was not being physically coerced. He was a wealthy, lonely man who had married his attractive, attentive caregiver. It was sordid, but it was legal. The old prenup was gone. Under the law, she was now his next of kin. The new will, the one Mr. Evans had drafted, left her the house, a massive cash inheritance, and control over the remainder of the estate in a trust. Our inheritance, the empire our father had built for his family, was being systematically transferred to a stranger, and we could do nothing. 2 months later, my father had a stroke. It was severe. It stole his words, his movement, but the doctors said his comprehension might still be intact. He was trapped inside a broken body. Clara was suddenly the grieving, devoted wife, holding vigil at the hospital. She controlled all access. Our visits were limited, supervised. She'd weep prettily for the nurses, then give us cold, efficient updates in the hallway. "He's resting. He needs quiet." The fortune was one thing, but she was stealing our father, the last, precious fragments of him. The helpless rage was a poison in my blood. We were losing everything, and the law was her accomplice. Bent in the depths of that despair, I remembered a detail. A single, throwaway line from years ago. My father, over a late-night whiskey, talking about his first big deal. The paperwork was a nightmare. He'd chuckled. I was so green. I had 2 sets of documents drawn up, the real ones, and a decoy set with a tiny flaw misspelled middle name on the title that I let the other side discover. They thought they'd caught me. It gave me the upper hand. He'd tapped his temple. Always have a silent partner, son, even if it's just a piece of paper. A misspelled name, a decoy. The idea was absurd, desperate, but it was the only thread I had. What if my father, the master strategist, the man who built empires on outthinking everyone, had seen the trap coming? What if he'd laid a counter trap? I started digging. Not through legal files. Clara and Mr. Evans controlled those. I went further back, to before Clara, to the era of the Titan. I spent nights in my father's home office, now Clara's domain, but she was always at the hospital after 9 p.m. I went through archived financial files, old insurance boxers in the basement. I was looking for a ghost, a silent partner. I found it not in a file, but in a book, a first edition copy of The Art of War on his office shelf. My father wasn't a collector, he was a reader. He'd have a cheap paperback. This was a showpiece. I took it down. The binding was cracked. Inside the back cover, tucked into a hollowed-out recess, was a single, sealed envelope. The handwriting was my father's, sharp and clear. It was addressed to no one. It was a memorandum, dated 1 week before Clara had suggested updating the will. The title made my heart stop. In the event of my marriage to Clara Voss, I tore it open. It was not a will. It was a declaration, a cold, clinical set of instructions. If I, Edward Sterling, married the aforementioned Clara Voss, be advised that any and all financial documents, wills, or trusts executed thereafter are to be considered and executed under a state of profound and deliberate duress. She is a predator. I see the design, but to expose it now is impossible. She has isolated me. Therefore, this is my countermove. It laid out a simple, devastating plan. He had, the month prior, transferred the true controlling shares of his holding company, the heart of the empire, into a blind trust. The trustee was a private fiduciary firm in Zurich, a firm my mother's family had used for generations. Their contact information was listed. The estate that Clara was set to inherit, the house, the cash accounts, the visible assets were, in his words, the painted set pieces, the scenery, the stage is mine. The final line was pure Edward Sterling. A good general lets the enemy take the field they think is valuable. It keeps them busy while you secure the high ground. The high ground, boys, is always ownership. I stood in the silent office, the paper trembling in my hand. He hadn't been a victim. He'd been a tactician. He'd let her believe she was winning. He'd sacrificed his own freedom, his own final years of peace, to lay a trap for a gold digger. He'd married her to bind her to a losing contract. Clara wasn't stealing a fortune. She was being handed the bag, while the real treasure had already been carried away. And I held the map. I looked at the clock. Clara would be back from the hospice soon. I took a picture of every page with my phone. I replaced the letter in the book on the shelf. I walked out of my father's house, a furious, grieving hope burning in my chest for the first time in months. The game wasn't over. My father had just passed me the baton. And it was time to show Clara what happened when you tried to out a con man. You ended up married to a ghost, an heir to an illusion. Walking out of that house, the cool night air felt like my first free breath in a year. The document in my phone wasn't just paper, it was a live wire. My father hadn't been a frail old man succumbing to a predator's charm. He'd been a chess master, sacrificing his queen, his own peace. His relationship with used to checkmate the opponent he saw coming from a mile away. He let Clara believe she had won the board, while the real king had already moved to safety. I went straight to Richard's house. I showed him the images on my phone. His face cycled through shock, fury, and finally, a fierce, tearful pride. "The old fox," he whispered, shaking his head. He played the loneliest, coldest hand imaginable. We couldn't go to our lawyers. Not yet. Mr. Evans was likely in Clara's pocket, and the local legal world was small. We needed the silent partner my father had designated, the Zurich firm, Vogel & C. We sent the scanned memorandum through their secure portal with a cover letter explaining the situation. The response came within 24 hours. It was informal, precise English. We acknowledged the memorandum of Edward Sterling, the instructions therein, valid and binding. The blind trust, Horizon Holdings AG holds 67% of voting shares in Sterling Consolidated. Per Mr. Sterling's directive, control is to be passed jointly to his sons, Richard and Michael Sterling. Upon the presentation of this memorandum and verification of his incapacitation, we require a notarized medical confirmation of his current state. It was real. The high ground was ours. Now, we had to play our part. We had to continue the charade that we were defeated sons, watching helplessly as the fortune slipped away. It was the hardest performance of our lives. We met with Clara and Mr. Evans to discuss father's care. We let them see our resignation, our bitterness. Clara was all gracious, somber victory. "I know this is hard for you," she said, her voice oozing false sympathy, "but Edward wanted me provided for. I will honor his legacy. His legacy." The gall of it burned, but we nodded, playing our parts as the outmaneuvered heirs. We provided the medical confirmation to Zurich. The transfer of control was silent, digital, and irrevocable. We now owned the empire, but Clara owned the stage. The final act began at the reading of the will. It was held in Mr. Evans's oak-paneled office. Clara wore a simple black dress, the picture of elegant grief. Rich and I sat across from her, our expressions carefully blank. Mr. Evans read the document. It was as we feared. The house, the liquid cash accounts, the art collection, everything tangible and immediately valuable, went to my beloved wife, Clara. There was a trust for the remaining corporate assets, with Clara as the executor, granting her a massive annual stipend and control over any decisions. On paper, she had won everything. When the last word was read, a serene smile touched Clara's lips. She looked at us, expecting to see devastation. Instead, Richard spoke. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "Mr. Evans, as you've just detailed, my father's will leaves the operational control of Sterling Consolidated to a trust overseen by Mrs. Sterling." "That is correct," Evans said, adjusting his glasses. "Well, that presents a small problem," I said, leaning forward. "You see, Sterling Consolidated doesn't actually own itself anymore." The room went still. Clara's smile froze. "What are you talking about?" I slid a single sheet of paper across the polished table. It was a letter from Vogel and C. on their austere letterhead, confirming that Horizon Holdings AG was the majority controlling shareholder of Sterling Consolidated, and that Richard and Michael Sterling were the sole directors of Horizon Holdings. It was dated 2 weeks before our father's marriage. Clara snatched the paper. Her eyes darted across it. The color drained from her face, leaving 2 spots of angry red on her cheeks. "Sis, this is a forgery, a trick. Edward never said anything about this. He didn't have to," Richard said. "He just had to do it. He transferred the real ownership a month before you even suggested updating the will. The company you think you control is a shell, a subsidiary. It pays rent to our holding company. It operates at our discretion." Mr. Evans was scanning the document, his legal certitude crumbling. "This changes the asset structure entirely. The trust described in the will, it controls a non-controlling asset. The value is dramatically reduced." "Reduced?" Clara's voice was a shriek. The genteel mask gone. "What are you saying?" I looked at her. This woman who had traded her youth for a calculated shot at a fortune, who had thought my father's mind was as feeble as his body. "We're saying you married a man for his money, and you got it. You get the house, you get the cash in the accounts. You get a stipend from a trust that administers a company that now exists mostly on paper." I stood up. "But the empire, the fortune, the power, that was never in the house. It was in the ownership, and he gave that to us. You're not a wealthy widow, Clara. You're the highly paid, soon-to-be former caretaker of an empty museum. The aftermath was a legal and financial whirlwind, but we held all the cards. We used our new control to spin down the old Sterling Consolidated, transferring its contracts and value to new entities we owned. Clara's trust was left with a hollowed-out corporate vessel and massive tax liabilities. The house, which was mortgaged to fund investments Mr. Evans had recommended, was a burden, not an asset. The cash was quickly swallowed by her new, lavish lifestyle and legal fees. She tried to sue, of course. She claimed elder abuse, coercion, but the evidence of my father's lucid, premeditated planning, the dated memorandum, The airtight Swiss trust crushed every claim, though court saw a brilliant man's last strategic move, not a victim's downfall. My father died 3 months later. We were with him. In his final, conscious moment, he looked at us, and his eyes, still sharp, held a question. I leaned close. "We have the high ground, Dad," I whispered. He closed his eyes, and he smiled. It was the last thing he ever did. Zephira is now a cautionary tale in a 1-bedroom apartment. Living off the dwindling cash she looted, her youth spent, her scheme exposed. She didn't just lose the fortune she stole, she lost the narrative. She's not the brave young wife of a tycoon. She's the punchline to my father's final, greatest joke. How did a 35-year-old caregiver steal my father's fortune by marrying him? She didn't. He let her take the decoy, and he taught his sons how to hold a real prize. Revenge wasn't ours to take. It was his to design. And his design was perfect.